10:25 with GBNews with Britain's newsroom with Andrew Piers Pottinger.
Where are we?
We've got Piers Pottinger in the studio, former advisor to successive Tory leaders, prime ministers, and a former advisor to the BBC chairman Michael Gray. But we'd like to ask you first, Piers, about Rwanda. So you heard Mark Francois talking about how we can effectively elbow the European court out of this little aspect of their deliberations. What do you make of that?
I think that's nonsense. I mean, you can't say to a legislative body, we don't like that law, so we're going to opt out of that, but we'll follow the rest. It won't work. And they'll find... I mean, the fact is, the government's in a complete mess over this, and they know it, and they're desperately scrabbling around to find a way out of it. And they're also being blocked by the Whitehall blob of civil servants who are completely against this, and people who think that we should open the floodgates and let all the immigrants in. And I'm afraid they're on a losing wicket here. They really are. And Rishi Sunak had a golden opportunity to move away from Rwanda when Suella Braverman, when he sacked her, and the Supreme Court turned us down. Turned the government down. He had an opportunity then to say, OK, Rwanda hasn't worked, we've got to kind of find somewhere else. Now, there were rumours floating around at the weekend that Pontins, who were closing two huge holiday camps, the reason they were closing them was they were going to be set up to prepare for immigrants coming in and using those holiday camps. I'm not sure whether there's any truth in that. It does sound plausible, I must say, because I think they've got to have another plan. The point is that Rishi's own position is now so attached to stop the boats that if he doesn't get this thing through and get it, and he's got opposition in the Lords. Don't forget our good friend, the Archbishop of Canterbury, will do all he can to stop this. We've got the left, of course, against this. We've got the civil servants against it. We've got the courts almost certainly trying to find a way to stop it. And I don't think he's going to succeed. No. And I think, therefore, he's got to have another plan, and he should be looking at that very quickly.
Is he going to succeed in stopping the BBC raising the licence fee by 9%? And I know you used to work for Michael Gray, who's a former chairman of the BBC, now head of Ofcom.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Gray was a wonderful chairman of the BBC. I wish he was there now, quite frankly, because the BBC is a total mess and has lost an enormous amount of public support, particularly over its dreadful coverage of the Gaza war. But also, the point is, it's neither one thing nor the other. It's neither a public organisation or a commercial. It's sort of in between the two, which is why it doesn't work. And if it's a public service, for example, if it's a public service channel, they don't need to pay presenters huge sums of money because they're not reliant on ratings. I mean, there's actually no justification for paying someone like Gary Lineker, for goodness sake, £1.6 million every year. I mean, why? He's just fronting highlights of football. I mean, that's the most bizarre thing. I mean, the BBC is a total mess. I don't think Sunak actually, under the way that I think Chris Hope said this earlier, I don't think the legislation as it stands allows the government to stop the increase, but it can advise and use all its influence, which is different, to say you can't actually increase it by 9%. Personally, I think it'll go ahead. I don't see Sunak stopping this. He's got too many issues. He's fighting on too many fronts.
What about Keir Starmer's astonishing interview in the Sunday Telegraph, where he sort of borrowed Mrs Thatcher and said that, you know, some of the things she did were good, and he was almost trying to say that if you vote for me, you'll get a change Prime Minister. Well, you knew her, you worked with her.
Yeah, I did, and Starmer's piece, I mean, I laughed out loud when I read it. It was absurd. I mean, you know, we all know Starmer's got his flip-flops. Now he seems to want Margaret Thatcher's handbag. I mean, it's ridiculous. He, of course, it's all about, again, the Labour Party have no policies, or they're terrified of actually telling the voters what their real policies are, which, of course, are old-fashioned socialist spite, giving more powers to the trade unions, attacking the countryside, penalising private schools, doing all of these things. And, of course, they'll increase taxes, even though they say they won't. I mean, but they're not committing to anything at the moment, but they don't want to put people off. So now he thinks, oh, yes, I'll get the right wing of the Conservatives, the Thatcherites, on board. Of course, there's not a hope in hell of that happening. No. Any true Thatcherite wouldn't vote Labour, whatever they said.
And he risks alienating the traditional Labour voter who will hate Margaret Thatcher.
Of course. I mean, he's got a very split party as well, don't forget. He's got a divided party because the extreme left hate Thatcher and always have. And they, and he's also got the problem with the anti-Semitism. Yeah. I mean, it's to the voter at the next election, it's a pretty dire choice. Yeah. And that's why our good friend Nigel, out there in the jungle, is actually holding quite a few cards politically, even though some people won't want to admit it. Well, Nigel Farage could be the key to the next election.
Well, but you know that on this face, sitting there, Stanley Johnson said last week, getting back before the election, game changer, behind the red wall particularly. Bob Neal, who was speaking to earlier, Tory MP, nearly had a heart attack at the very idea of it. But he is a game changer,
well,
isn't he,
Nigel? Of course he is, because if you look at the last two by-elections, the majority by which Labour won was the almost exact number of the people who voted Reform, who would normally, you would have thought, voted Conservative. Yeah. And the other thing is, it isn't the people who voted Labour who were Conservative voters. A lot of the Conservative voters didn't come out. Yeah. And at the next election, traditional, proper Conservatives, every one of them needs to get out and vote. And, of course, if Farage was with the Conservatives, I think they would.
Right, Piers, thank you so much.